Today, our issue is human trafficking. There is nothing more dehumanizing than the stealing, the taking away of human dignity through human trafficking for slave labor. We don't want to be taken away from our roots and go and be taken advantage of as slave laborers, to allow our children to become instruments of human trafficking and the desecration of their sex life in the sex trade. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And today, these august personalities will give you the kind of legal advocacy for victims of human trafficking. So with that, I honor you, President of the U.S. Federation of Middle East Peace, because where Sally Kader is, where there is peace in the Middle East, it will go all over the world. Give her a big hand, please.
Thank you for your kind words, and thank you everybody for being here today. I am really thrilled because I have not only wonderful speakers, but great friends. Most of the people on the panel are individuals that really care. And this is not the first time we have had the wonderful judges to come and speak to us on several different issues. Since 1990, the phrase human trafficking was coined and an international awareness of the 21st century as a global phenomena of human trafficking. Slowly we moved into today, and it's in the last 10 years, this awareness has grown by leaps and bounds. Today we recognize this phenomena as a shared global shame and share global vision. The United Nations, as we all know, has played a great role in educating the world leaders and the different parts of the world. And for the first time in 2000, President Bill Clinton signed the United States' first U.S. anti-trafficking bill. Under President George Bush, the first U.S. anti-trafficking department was established at the U.S. State Department in 2001. In June 2001, their first Trafficking in Persons annual report was published. While the early days focused on labor and sex trafficking, today the spectrum is broader, also including the internet and organ trafficking. And we have done several as a federation. The first human trafficking event that I organized and put together in this UN was in 2003. And we have done one in Georgetown, we have done one in Kansas, Missouri, and several places. But we've had a yearly event at the UN. And I recall when we did a town hall at Georgetown University, President Bush at that time did send us the first ambassador to be with us. And I will tell you something else, that a very dear friend and a wonderful human being, his name is Jan Eliasson. He was a former president of the UN General Assembly at that time. And he sent his word via video to us. And he stated one of the best decisions the US made was elevating the head of the US Anti-Trafficking Office to the level of ambassadorship. Every country ought to follow that lead. So it is a big deal for all of us to be here and to be aware. And now, of course, it's all over the world and we are all aware of it. But yet it's getting worse and bigger and more money is involved. So what they say, it just takes a lot to tackle. But we're not giving up. So with this panel, I would like to shed some light on a lot of the laws that we have. And first of all, I would like to introduce the most wonderful human being that I like to call a friend. Not only because he is a great ambassador representing his country, but he also has the most wonderful wife. And Mrs. Faye here, she is also the president of a group that is the UN wives, diplomat wives. So I would like to say a little bit of the background of the ambassador, if I may. He has a lot to be said about him. So I will try to be as brief as I can. He is not only now is very tired, I have to tell you, and I'm very honored and pleased that he accepted to be here because he has been leading this whole CSW. He is the chair of the CSW this year. So you can imagine with all these women, everybody is talking and talking, and they have time, and he had to shut them up, and he couldn't. So I have watched him, you know, and he's saying the time, and they keep on and on. So it's just amazing just to be there and watch how this whole event takes place. The ambassador was, before coming to this to the UN, he had served in several countries. He was in Geneva, he was in Brussels, and Sydney, and United Arab Emirates. Ambassador Cabactulan is a political economist, having completed his bachelor and master's degree in political science at the University of Philippines, and a certificate in development economics from the same university. He also received a diploma with the merit on commercial policy from the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, now WTO, in Geneva, Switzerland. He has extensive experience in negotiation. That's probably why he was good with the women. And he is a career diplomat, and he had several assignments that he has done. And Ambassador Cabactulan received a presidential citation for his role in the repatriation of Filipinos from Lebanon during the Lebanon-Israeli crisis in 2006. He successfully presided for 2010 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference. He was conferred the Order of Sikatuna with the rank of Datu, the highest Philippine decoration for exemplary achievement in foreign service and international relations. He was a member of the team that negotiated Philippine accession to the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. So there is so many that I can keep on telling you, but it gives me a great pleasure to introduce to you our great ambassador, the champion for the CSW women, Cabactulan. Please.
I can't find the words that would express my full appreciation of what Salwa has done for many of us, for the whole world in fact. And if I say also that if we can say something like a dictatorship or a conspiracy, I would like to say that it's also a conspiracy of Mr. Kader and Salwa. They are friends of ours. You know. But it hits very close to my heart. They have been doing a lot in this U.S. Federation for Middle East Peace. Right after or during the 2010 Review Conference on Nuclear Non-Proliferation. For a long period, nothing has been done with respect to the 1995 resolution on the Middle East to declare Middle East as a region free of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. I pushed that very hard, and it was part of the agreed conclusion. Hopefully, we're still hoping that it will happen, because somehow it was, shall we say, we laid to the side for some reason or the other. That's not the point I'm driving at, all on nuclear thing, but people have said that I'm an expert on two things now, nuclear bombs and women. And they are equally explosive, but shut up and just. But they say that that's really a good thing, because after all, it's a positive and a negative. Because for women, it's always a positive explosion. Well, anyhow, just before coming here, I had a luncheon, and I was invited to speak as well by the Women's Federation for World Peace International. My theory, or I would say I advance, and everything I said were all linked to what I said, a nexus between gender equality and world peace, or international peace and security. I developed my presentation on that, and very quickly here, I am linking it further down to the specific things, and that is human trafficking, the modern day slavery, to gender equality, to world peace, and all that. It's all linked together. Right after, in fact, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Review Conference, which I presided, and thanks heaven, it was successful after. I was thrown again to one of the negotiations, but now on social issues, in the third committee. And this is Resolution 65-190 on human trafficking. And this was the first time, in fact, that another angle which has been somehow neglected, and we have to develop it further, is the question of demand. We have been used to talking about the victims. These should be considered victims, but in the past, of course, they're more considered as criminals, but that's the time that we had. And then the third party, or whatever, call it the mafias, or the one that... But what about the demand? Unfortunately, and by the way, this resolution is a biennial resolution, was revisited last year in 67-145. Again, these two paragraphs were there. Still very mild. But it hits on the point on this portion of demand, but it's more left to countries to do something. And that's where we come in, because much that I admire the judges here, they can only do so much. It has, because they have to follow what's in the laws. And the laws has to be acted upon by countries, by the legislature. Of course, it can be argued that we have so many laws in the land. And the question is, implementation. Maybe for many of countries of us. Maybe in this country, the implementation is well okay. I don't know. They can say for that. They can argue that later on. But that's why I said that I go beyond what is legal, of course. That's my job. And provide the milieu by which the rules of the game that they are going to interpret for the benefit of everyone. I say everyone because there is a logic, and this is what Hillary said in International Women's Day. Human rights are rights for all. And therefore, it is very important that we develop a broader perspective by which every inch of consideration must be taken into account, for which later on, the judges will give flesh and bones. Now, when we talk about human trafficking, it is very important that we go back to the UN Convention on against transnational organized crime, or the Palermo Protocol. You know, perhaps for you, if I will just quickly review this for you, it's quite a long definition, but it talks about a person, trafficking a person means recruitment, transfer, transportation, quite a long. But there are common elements here in there. One, there is a threat or use of force. It's like invasion. I'm not talking about Ukraine here. I'm talking only about women trafficking. Second, there is an issue there all the time about fraud and deception. And that's why Even if a Filipina in the province or in Thailand or in Ukraine or anywhere, for inducement and fee that they will be given work and all that unpaid. But if there is a hidden intention there of deceit, that she is not getting the full measure of what she should be receiving, or the privileges, or that she'll say that should be given to her, that is still falling within the Palermo definition of human trafficking. Now, let's say translation of action of countries also. In 64, before 65 session of the UN, we established in this resolution the UN Trust Fund for victims of human trafficking. I would wish that there is more money here so that we can help those who are really victims, because it's meant to help, especially those, because I have been the ambassador in United Arab Emirates for 6 years. The Philippine government, perhaps you don't know, spends money for persons victim of trafficking, cases of rape and heinous crimes. We hire lawyers in the Arab world. We have safe houses in all parts of the challenge situation. And it would require months and months and months before cases would progress. And that's why money is required. And that's why the Human Trust Fund. But what is the record we have now? This might be one of the advocacy that you have to push. There are only 16 countries that have contributed. And about 12 organizations, 1.3 million, that's how they have amassed. Well, amassed maybe is a big word. That you have, the Philippines is one of the 16 countries. Just a token, of course. But we hope that more will have. $10,000 US, you know. But this is a very important thing. You want action, governments must do something. And governments into national implementation level will have to devise laws and all that. But very quickly, I would like to add, to end, because it is very important that we hear from our judges, which it will be illuminating to us. Because in the end, action must be done very quickly. And in the Palermo, and in the resolutions that we have, there are 3 P's that would stand out as the guide of all countries, including the US on the 3 tier. You know. P, prevention, promotion, prevention, protection, and prosecution. And that's perhaps their area. I was, right after 2010, maybe you know that I was involved in the negotiation. Governor Perry invited me to Austin, Texas, and 2 senators, of course, one congressman here to speak about human trafficking, and I discussed this. And I also discussed to others about these 3 P's, because it's very important. For instance, so many countries, including the Philippines, rank very high on the 2 P's. Prevention, protection, but they're very low in prosecution. We have to do a lot more in here. But something must also be understood. Some countries, or many countries for that matter, is not confrontational in character. You don't bring everybody, if you sleep in the floor or somewhere, and bring him to court and all that. Unlike here, perhaps. Maybe that's another thing, and that's why but it has to glide fast, move up. And if you penalize these countries because of there is failure of 1 piece, you might be doing disservice to the issue of promoting action against trafficking. Why? Because you are penalizing them by withholding perhaps certain resources, certain assistance, but that's their milieu, they have to be helped. What is very important that must be added is the 4th P, and that is my advocacy as well, and that is partnership. And that's why I went to the idea of pushing demand, and I went to the idea about this global fund, and in fact, concrete action in terms of assisting either technical, monetary, or otherwise, countries who are in difficult situation. I go this far by ending now by saying that, indeed, when you look at it in a broader picture, there is a nexus between human trafficking and, of course, the dignity of a woman. You go and link that to gender equality, when we talk about gender equality, immediately two things must come out. That is women empowerment, I include of course girls, and efforts that must be done to fight against discrimination. And that's why that is the linkage of human trafficking, of modern day slavery, and that is linked to other lofty objectives, whether you call it international peace and security, or you talk about development of all. Because it's commonly agreed, commonly known, that unless women are really up to what they must do to contribute the total development of a country, there is no maximization of what a country can do towards development. So the twin objectives towards the end of development, international peace and security can even be traceable to the pedigree, to the law, to other issues, including human trafficking. Thank you, Salwa.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. We all learned a lot, and I'm in the field and I've learned a lot. So isn't it amazing the knowledge that we gain when somebody who knows what they're talking about, tell us. Now I am also very honored to have another wonderful speaker who we had the pleasure of having her speak at our panel before, and she took a lot of success from everybody. Everybody was asking me about her, so I'm really honored to have her. I'll tell you a little bit about Judge Elizabeth Lamb. She is the United States immigration judge. And maybe this is why everybody wanted to talk to her, because they want to stay in this country. Judge Lamb, she is, as I said, immigration judge, and she has a BA from College of Mount St. Vincent, New York. She has her law degree at St. John University, also New York. She was appointed to the Immigration Court September 1995. Previously, she worked at several departments. One of them is New York City Department of Consumers Affairs, legislative. She was also worked with the Honorable Hugh L. Carey, legislative assistant and speechwriter, New York City Department of Criminal Justice Services Litigation Unit. And so she has worked in several places, and the most wonderful part, she's still as the immigration. So if you want to line up afterwards, give her a big welcome now.
Very much. Well, what you can glean from the introduction is that I'm a New Yorker. And my award, I listened to Ms. Kader's awards, and my award is being able to work with Mrs. Kader and her husband. It is an honor to be on this panel and an honor to be here today amongst my colleagues to both learn and to speak. And one of the reasons we are all here is because we came to speak out loud. That's an Emile Zola rendition of his philosophy. We come to speak out loud. And that's very important for us to do. And if the question is, why us? Why are we here? We are judges, we are lawyers, we are teachers, we are volunteers, we are members of civic and religious groups. Why us? Why are we here? And President Obama, who is reinforcing the seriousness of human trafficking, gave a report in September of 2012, and he answers the question for us today, why are you and I here in this room talking about human trafficking? And the President has said, it ought to concern every person, because human trafficking is a debasement of our common humanity. It ought to concern every community because it tears at the very social fabric. It ought to concern every business because it distorts market. It ought to concern every nation because it endangers public health and fuels violence and organized crime. The President went on to say that he's talking about the injustice, the outrage of human trafficking, which must be called by its true name, modern slavery. The ambassador and Mrs. Kader have both referenced this. So imagine that you and I, in whatever capacity, are sitting in this very comfortable, very technically arranged room in the year 2014 in the United States of America, and we have to talk about a problem that has existed in our century, in our day, in our era, and this problem is slavery. Now, I'm a United States immigration judge, and I must say that I sit here today in my personal capacity, and anything I say does not reflect the court's rulings or the anything about the court, and I'm supposed to say that, and I have, so I forgot the exact boilerplate, but you get the idea. So I'm here to talk to you about human trafficking from my little corner of the world. And my little corner of the world deals with United States law, and that may seem strange to you because immigration deals with foreign manners. No one comes into my courtroom who's born in the United States. If they do, it's a mistake, and that has happened. But we deal with United States laws. And as both the ambassador and Mrs. Kader has said, we've come a long way because there was a time, not even longer than I would say 10 years ago, when human trafficking was not even recognized as a problem by some places in the world. And now, very much because of the United Nations and this Palermo resolution that the ambassador was talking about, then it was put actually in a treaty calling it a crime. Human trafficking is a crime, and they have this 3P program the ambassador referenced, and that's the prevention, the protection, and prosecution. So as an immigration judge, I can do something to protect people, and I am mandated to do that. I'm not a prosecutor, and the only preventive work I can have is in dealing with the people who come before me in the best possible legal way. We are given special training. I work under the auspices of the Executive Office for Immigration Review in the Department of Justice. And we as judges are given special training because there's the William Wilberforce Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and there is many statutes on the book, and they define for us what trafficking is. And to put it the ambassador has already done a very thorough job of that, but to put it in what I would say a nutshell, once a condition is codified or put in a statute or in a regulation, it has a meaning very different from the Webster's dictionary meaning of human trafficking. When you put those words together and even hear them, human trafficking, that's a very provocative sentence. And when you add the word at the end of that, human trafficking in children, that's a tragic sentence. But human trafficking, as now defined and codified by the United States law, and in the Palermo Convention as well, tells me when I go to work every day that trafficking in persons and human trafficking is used as an umbrella for the act of recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing or obtaining a person for compelled labor of commercial sex acts through the use of force, fraud, or coercion, or as amended for purposes of labor. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean to me? If you were to ask me, how many people come into your courtroom and are victims of human trafficking, I would say to you very few. And if you would be surprised at that, I will tell you why. Victims of human trafficking have been stripped of their identity and their dignity many years before they ever get to me or to United States immigration courtroom. The stories that are told, both in my courtroom and in the State Department report, the last one that was issued in 2013, lists stories from all over the world of human trafficking. And I must say at this time, the United States is not exempt from this human trafficking that goes on. My colleagues will discuss that with you. So we cannot say we are the United States, we are fighting to cure this, because we ourselves have this problem. Trafficking, human trafficking, does not mean necessarily, as defined by law, that one has to move a person from a border to a border. One can be stolen, kept, coerced, without even crossing a border and still be a victim of human trafficking. The numbers, the last numbers that I read, and they are not up to date because they change, say that only around 40,000 victims have been identified in the last year, in contrast with the social scientists who say as many as 27 million men and women and children are trafficked at any given time. These numbers are low because, again, these people have no voice. A young woman who was trafficked, and she's in New York now, and she crossed borders and finally got here, she said, "I am a ghost. I have no presence at all." Now, to backtrack to my little courtroom, I may have had victims of human trafficking, and I may not even know it, because when people come into my courtroom, the first thing we say, we have interpreters from all over the world. Stand up, we say, "What language do you speak the best?" They tell us. We hopefully have that interpreter there that day, and we say, "Stand up, raise your right hand. You have to swear that everything you say here today is going to be the truth and nothing but the truth." I'm sitting there wearing a black robe. I sit elevated, the way I am before you now. The person who appeared before me is sitting down here or next to me here. That can be a little intimidating for anyone. However, the person looks and through the interpreter either says, "I will swear," or sometimes, depending on their culture, they say, "But I can only affirm." We go, "All right, affirm. Everything I'm going to say is true." Now, here's the easy question. State your true and correct name for the record. People fall silent. Now, the prosecutor sometimes says, "Well, the person won't even give me the name. I mean, what's going on here? Please tell me your name." So they will tell me a name. It's not necessarily their name because they gave up their name a long time ago. They were given, hopefully at birth, but some of them didn't have parents almost right from the beginning. They were given a name, but they lost that name because they were out in the field one day or they were on a street someday and someone picked them up and took them and said, "You work for me in sex trafficking." That's not what they tell them right away. They say, "You're hungry? Come on, I'll give you food. You need to give a little work for your family, I'll help you." The next thing, they're out of their country, they're in another country. Maybe Mexico, maybe not, maybe anywhere in the world. They're not Elizabeth Lamb anymore. They're a name they never heard of. And then they move from country to country. They're given passports with different names on them. That's the only way they break free someday. They run away or pay yet someone else who gives them money to try to get to freedom, to try to get away from this trafficking. By the time they get to the United States, they've traveled with an illegal passport. They get caught at the border or they're picked up on the street. Then they could be convicted or charged with another illegal act of traveling with an illegal document or passport. So when the question is asked, "What is your true and correct name?" some people stare at me because they don't know what name to say. And we have to be sensitive to that and to many other issues. Tell me your address. Where do you live today in the United States? Isn't that an easy question? Wouldn't a truthful person just tell me where they live? Well, they may live with the man in the back of the courtroom who's their uncle. Or they may live with the man in the courtroom who is their friend. And sometimes, if they get as far as political asylum, we can clear the courtroom. That's a private situation. They dare not say truthfully how they came to the United States. They dare not say who this person is, because this person may want them to get a green card, may want them to get status, because then they can send them out to work some more. So even when people have the green card sometimes, the trafficking continues. What do I do about this? What do I do as an immigration judge? Well, I'm trained. We have questions if we suspect that someone in the courtroom in front of us is a victim of trafficking that we're supposed to ask. Would I ask it on the record in an open courtroom? I would not, because the law also tells us that the safety of the person in front of us is the most important consideration. So if we can get the person alone and off the record, sometimes with the assistant chief counsel, who's the prosecutor for the Department of Homeland Security, the other component in the courtroom, we ask questions like, are you working? How are you supporting yourself? Where do you live? Do you think these people are free to give us these answers? These people are not free. Once you have been trafficked, and I think my colleagues who are more direct support surface will talk to you about that, so I won't go into it, but once you are trafficked, the emotional and psychological damage done to you as a human being is almost immeasurable, and it is tragic. We are concentrating today on women who are victims of trafficking, but as we learn more about this horror, this blight, we find out that there are men as well who also don't speak up. children soldiers at 7 years old who are taken, and they're soldiers in their country at 7, and it goes on from there. If they get to me in the United States, sometimes they're 15 or 17. These are changed human beings. These are not people who can freely tell you, this is my story, help me. That's not how it works. But we do have resources, and we have a hotline, and we are directed to give any information in confidence to the court administrator, who will in turn forward it to services, direct services, which you will hear about today. And all we can do is try to be sensitive to these people. We have to believe in these people. There are articles that say if we open this up to human trafficking, if you really believe all the stories you hear, this will open the courts up to massive fraud, and the courts are so clogged now with cases. What should we do? We cannot curtail this. On the contrary, if people can see and learn that when they come to us, they will get help, maybe this will open up more information so the persons who are being prosecuted, who have to be found, the rings that have to be found, we will facilitate that process so that only then can we start, as Mrs. Kader said, to stop this from growing, because it is growing all of the time. And I have to be mindful when I'm sitting there in a robe, even if I take it off, because we have a juvenile docket, unaccompanied minors, and we try not to talk to them in the regular way. We try to talk to them as if they're innocent children. But even not the children, we say, I can help you if you talk to me. Do you know how many people said that to them before they got to my courtroom? Come to me. I'll help you. You know what happened? The rapes, the beatings, the imprisonment. These are the people who among us today are slaves. Slavery is a disgrace. It's a blight on all our cultures, and all we can do is what we're doing today, which is talk out loud about it, to work with them. I admire all of the volunteers that I know from court, and Sanctuary for Families is here today, who work with these people, even when it seems to be of no use, because the numbers are great, the need is great, but we come to speak out loud. And Mrs. Kader has given us that ability today. We'll be forever grateful to her for it. And I encourage all of you to help volunteer, to participate. All lawyers who want to come into court and voluntarily, and even the large firms do it sometimes to help us, we appreciate it. Because in the end, we're all this big family, but some of us are suffering. And so thank you for the opportunity to let me speak to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Lam. She mentioned to you training. I am privileged to be a part of the National Association of Women Judges. And I've seen firsthand the training that they go through. And I had been participating in some of these training for human trafficking, and the last one I was in, it was in New Orleans. We partied a little, but it was really nice. Just yesterday, Saturday, this last Saturday, we had another major training, and I'm sorry I was not able to go because of CSW. But the next person that I'm going to be introducing you to, and she's another amazing judge, was able to do it, and she was just filling me in on that particular training on Saturday. The Honorable Cathy Serrette. She is the judge of the 7th Judicial Circuit in Maryland, Circuit Court for Prince George County, Upper Marlboro, Maryland. I don't know why I said Pennsylvania. I'm the second person who thought she was from Pennsylvania, and I know better. Cathy has been in the Family Division Coordinating Judge for the Circuit Court for Prince George County, a member of the Maryland Court of Appeals Standing Committee on Pro Bono Legal Services. She's the chair of the Maryland Judicial Conference Family Law Committee. She's also the chair of the Critical Barriers Subcommittee of the Maryland Access to Justice Commission. She's the chair of Prince George County Family Justice Center Task Force, a director of the 4th Community Legal Services of Prince George County, the Maryland Judiciary Liaison on the Hague Convention on the Civil Aspects of International Child Abduction, and a member of the Prince George County Welfare Committee of the National Association of Women Judges, and serves on an NWJ Women Moving Forward in Maryland Correctional Institution for Women, and which she is co-chaired since 2008 and 2010. Also in 2003, she initiated the Maryland Women Bar Association Thomas J. Waxter Children's Center program, in which she continues to play an active role. Among so many of her accomplishments, she is a good friend, and I will let her tell you about her firsthand experience and the last training she had this last Saturday. Please welcome with me Honorable Cathy Serrette.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's an honor to speak to you all. Rene Bonetti and his wife moved from Brazil to the United States in 1979 and brought with them Hilda dos Santos to be their domestic servant. Hilda spoke only Portuguese. She was illiterate. She spoke no English. She did not have a passport at the time, but they secured a passport for her, and she came to live with the family. From September of 1979 until April of 1998, she worked for the Bonettis in the United States in slave-like conditions. She performed arduous labor, many hours a day from 6 in the morning till 10 at night. She cleaned the house every day. She washed the windows once a week. She dug ditches when they needed a new line for electricity. She washed their dog. She watched their children. When she didn't do what the Bonettis liked, she was beaten. Mrs. Bonetti beat her almost daily, initially with her hand, eventually with her shoe. When her leg was cut during her work with the Bonettis, they refused to take her to the hospital, and eventually when she had to go because it became infected, it was diagnosed with a untreatable condition. Eventually, she had a tumor in her stomach, which the Bonettis did not take her to the hospital for, and ultimately she had to get a hysterectomy, although it was benign. She lived in the basement of this home that had many bedrooms. She was not allowed to use the bathroom. If she wanted to bathe herself, she had to bring the water down in a bucket. They kept a lock on the refrigerator door to make sure she didn't go into the refrigerator. When the Bonettis were on vacation, she was out in the community after 19 years of servitude looking for food. One of the neighbors who spoke Portuguese had a talk with her, saw the tumor in her stomach, which was the size of a cantaloupe, and reported it to a nun at her church, who came forward and rescued Miss Bonetti. I received a call back in 1998 asking whether or not I would take the civil pro bono case of Miss Bonetti. She had no immigration status, she had no money, she had no home, and we had very few laws to protect her. As it turns out, at the time, there were no trafficking laws, but there was a criminal prosecution. When Mr. Bonetti was arrested, Mrs. Bonetti took all of their assets and ran to Brazil. We tried to negotiate with the Brazilian embassy to try to reach those assets, to no avail. We ultimately were able to get a lien on their home when he was convicted of harboring an illegal alien and conspiracy to harbor an illegal alien. sold the home, and were able to get the proceeds of their home at least for Hilda dos Santos. As I said, in 1999, we had no comprehensive trafficking laws, and we were only able to get a prosecution by virtue of the fact that she was an illegal alien. We had no civil laws that would protect her in any comprehensive way, and we had no good services. And here we are today, not that far after that. And what I'd like to do is go over with you some of the federal and state laws that have passed since 1999, as well as what some of the things that we are doing and some of the things you can do to help fight human slavery or domestic human slavery. As Sally told you in her introduction, in 2000, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act was passed, the first comprehensive federal legislation to deal with the issue of human trafficking. As the ambassador has said, and as Judge Lamb said, the legislation, and most of the legislation since, has addressed what we've been calling the 3 Ps: prevention, protection, and prosecution. The Act has been reauthorized a number of times with additional provisions added each time, in 2003, 2005, 2008, and again in 2013. In 2000, for the first time, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act created an office to monitor and combat trafficking, which was located within the U.S. State Department. It created public awareness and information programs to get information out about human trafficking, and created a federal task force for the implementation of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. For the first time, it gave protection and assistance to foreign national victims who are trafficked by making them eligible for the Federal Witness Protection Act and other federal and state benefits. T-visas were established for the first time, a special visa available for trafficking victims. Further, it created the temporary legal status of continued presence to help with law enforcement in the United States. Human trafficking became a federal crime with severe penalties for the first time, and restitution was mandated. In 2003, over $200 million was added to the budget to fight human trafficking. The United States government was ordered to terminate contracts with overseas contractors who engaged in sex trafficking or commercial sex or used forced labor. Additionally, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2003 extended benefits to the families of trafficking victims. In 2005, additional provisions were added, authorizing new programs to serve U.S. citizens or legal permanent resident victims of domestic human trafficking, including a piloting program for sheltering minors. In 2008, it was again reauthored. At this time, it required the Labor Department to work towards preventing U.S. citizens from using goods produced or extracted from slave labor, and set deadlines for the Department of Labor to provide a list of goods produced by slave labor or children's labor. As well, it prevented U.S. military assistance to countries that use children soldiers. In 2013, the Act was again reauthorized, this time as part of the Violence Against Women's Act. And in 2013, amendments were passed that provided the programs to ensure that citizens do not purchase products made by victims of human trafficking and to prevent child marriages. In addition to the federal laws that were passed, every state in the United States has passed a series of trafficking legislation that covers a number of different areas to combat trafficking and, again, to implement the 3 Ps. Folks may be familiar with Polaris organization, the Polaris Project, and if you go on their website, they have a wonderful, wonderful program where you can click onto your state. And what it will do is tell you what legislation has been passed in your state to combat human trafficking and what legislation has not been passed. And they've graded the states. And they will also tell you which federal legislation is pending. So you'll get a map that looks like this in different colors. So those of you who are from New Jersey, you can be very proud. You have a perfect 10 score. Right? New Jersey should be proud. And what they're looking at are very important components of combating human trafficking. Whether or not your state has laws that prohibit and criminalize sex trafficking. Whether or not your state has laws that will criminalize labor trafficking. Whether or not your state has safe harbor protecting sexually exploited children. Many states do not. Many states still prosecute children who have been trafficked as delinquents rather than putting them in the child welfare system. We'll tell you whether or not your state has laws that vacate convictions for sex trafficking. Many states don't expunge the records or vacate the records of victims of trafficking who've been convicted on criminal charges because of the trafficking, such as prostitution. And so if you go on this website, what you will see is, number one, some of the work that needs to be done. California is leading the country domestically in opposing international labor trafficking. California passed the California Transparency and Supply Chain Act, which requires all manufacturers who have business of $100 million or more to disclose on their website what is being done to evaluate and to ensure that trafficking wasn't used in the production and supply chain for those supplies. A very important and crucial component of fighting human trafficking and labor trafficking. It has been estimated that 21 to 26 million men, women, and children worldwide are forced into labor or commercial sex. It is, as been said by each of the speakers, modern-day slavery that we must fight against. It is not just international, it is very much alive here in the United States. One of the components of the TVPA was the development of a National Human Trafficking Resource Center that's run by Polaris. It's a very important center, not only because of the information it provides, but because it runs the National Human Trafficking Resource Center's hotline. So if you have a pencil or a pen, take it out. 888-373-7888. That's 888-373-7888. Or you can text BEFREE, B-E-F-R-E-E. It is a national, toll-free hotline, operated 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, to fight human trafficking. Since it's been opened over the past 5 years, calls have increased by 259%. They've received reports of 9,298 unique cases of human trafficking here in the United States. 41% of the sex trafficking cases and 20% of the labor trafficking cases referenced U.S. citizens as victims. So many people have the perception that it is only individuals coming into the United States from outside of the country who are trafficked. No, that's not the case. Women, girls, children, boys, men are trafficked in great numbers here in the United States. Women were referenced as victims in 85% of the trafficking cases, and men in 40% of the labor trafficking cases. So what can you do? Publicity matters. Get the word out. Let the hotline go everywhere. Let folks know about the hotline. I did a training 2 weeks ago at a high school for girls and boys in a high school about human trafficking. We wanted to do two things in our training. We wanted the children to both understand what human trafficking was. We hoped to prevent them from becoming victims of human trafficking, and we hoped that they would become advocates of human trafficking. In the course of this training, we gave children Post-its at the end and said, if you have any questions at all, please let us know what those questions are, and we'll answer them later on in the training. One of those Post-its revealed a trafficking situation. It is prevalent. So what can you do besides getting the hotline out? If you're a lawyer, we need your pro bono services. Victims need advocates. You'll hear about wonderful service organizations that are here locally. If you're not local, the Human Trafficking Pro Bono Legal Center, you can find it online, is the national clearinghouse for pro bono legal services. Go on the Polaris Project organization website, as I said. They have a page that actually is for what can I do? And it's under www.endslaverynow.com. And it tells you over 100 different activities that you can do to help stop human trafficking. And it has lists from everyone from bus drivers to homemakers, meter readers, teachers, webmasters, whoever you are, you can contribute to ending trafficking. Every single one of us have a role to play in ending modern slavery. And I thank you all for being here to figure out what you can do.
Thank you, Cathy. It is the biggest money-making business on earth. It's the estimated number of dollars that the human trafficking generate yearly, and this is not obviously accurate. This is a lot we don't know about. It is almost $40 billion with a B, $billion, more than any business that you can think of. And no wonder why a lot of people in a lot of countries look the other way, because there's money for them in it. And we have to stop this. We have to stop it. And there's a lot of signs that you can check on other people when they look, how afraid they are. I know I met this a wonderful person, and I did not know who she was. I was invited to an event that was Oprah Winfrey, and everybody was there. And this wonderful, lovely-looking woman came and spoke with me, and her mother was there, and I thought she was just like, any of us. And I was not aware who she was. And lo and behold, she was a person that was trafficked at the age of 9 or 11, and she had a movie done on her life, and her name is Dugan, and I'm sure you all have seen the movie. And she was like, normal. I mean, I didn't know what to make of it, and I thought, what? And here was Oprah Winfrey and Diane Sawyer honoring her for surviving it. And I'm sure you all have seen the movie or read her story. Not only she was kidnapped by a man and his wife in this country and shackled, and had 2 children from her, predator, and she raised them. And then, I don't know by what miracle, she finally was able to run away and was saved. And the police was there, everybody was there, the person was, a known predator, and the neighbors would say that they are hearing children in the backyard, but they will go in there and they would not find anything. So as Judge Catherine said, that it is right here in this country. It is everywhere, and this is why I really like every year to share with all the international community that come to the CSW that our problem really has no geographical boundary. We are not, like one country has it more, one country has it less. We're in it together. It's a problem. It's a global problem. So you all have to do your little bit to be able to conquer this big problem. Now I would like to also introduce a very accomplished and a wonderful judge that is, I'm honored to have her also on our panel, the Honorable Judge Judy Harris Kluger, Executive Director of Sanctuary for Families. The Honorable Judge Harris Kluger assumed the role of Executive Director after 25 years as a judge. So she was a judge for 25 years and she just retired. And she took on this other position that she will also share with us now in New York State, more recently as a Chief Policy and Planning for the Court. I guess I have to change my glasses. Sorry, guys. I know how I fold it first. That's better. Chief of Policy and Planning for the court system. In that role, she oversaw 300 problem-solving courts and helped develop innovative policies and strategies to improve the delivery of justice, particularly in the area of gender violence. Most recently, she led the effort to open the State Human Trafficking Intervention Court. During her tenure with the court, Judge Kluger was also responsible for the statewide implementation of the integrated domestic violence courts, a one-family/one-judge model for the injunction of domestic violence cases. Prior to her appointment to the bench, she headed the Domestic Violence Bureau in Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. Judge Kluger brings to Sanctuary a deep knowledge of and commitment to the issues facing its client. In 2013, she received the Award for Excellence in Public Service from the New York State Bar Association and is a prior recipient of Sanctuary Avali Award for leading women and children to safety. Please welcome with me our Honorable Judge Harris.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here. And I know time is limited, so what I'd like to do is talk to you about our human trafficking intervention courts. As was mentioned, I was a judge for 25 years. I handled cases involving women accused of prostitution. When I started my career as a judge, these women were considered addicts, profit-driven, incorrigible, and my own experience was that I would sit in a courtroom and our court bailiff would say, okay, I'm bringing the prostitutes in to be arraigned. Now, they never said, I'm bringing the murderers in. They never said, I'm bringing the robbers in. Somehow it was all right to call women accused of prostitution prostitutes as opposed to people accused of a crime. So what we did in New York over the years, we began to recognize that many, if not most, of these women were trafficked in some way. Now, we have on the law on the books in New York State now, there are anti-trafficking statutes. But to give you some idea of the types of cases that, and the number of cases where that's charged, when I did before we opened these courts, when I did an analysis of the caseload in New York, there were about statewide 40 cases where men and women were accused of trafficking victims. But there were almost 5,000 cases of women and men and youngsters accused of prostitution. So we recognize that many of these people were actually victims and being trafficked. And you can be trafficked from Brooklyn to the Bronx. You can be trafficked from Upper Manhattan to Lower Manhattan. It's not just being trafficked internationally. And I think that's what most of the general public, how they view trafficking and how we view trafficking. But we had a very forward-thinking chief judge in New York State, and together with groups like Sanctuary for Families, where I work now, as opposed to Judge Lamb, I don't have to say that I am only speaking in my personal role, not as a judge. I can be an advocate now, and it's been tremendously freeing to be able to say that we recognize that people are trafficked, not necessarily internationally, not necessarily from state to state. It can be by the pimp who's sitting in the courtroom, posting your bail to send you out again onto the street to work for him. We recognize that in this country, basically, women, mostly women, begin to live that kind of life between ages of 12 and 14, as well as about 80% have been sexually abused as children. So we said, how can we help these victims, even though they come into our court as defendants? So we decided to set up human trafficking intervention courts. And those courts essentially are courts where judges who are trained in the issues relating to victims of trafficking help those who wish to exit the life to connect them to support services like those offered by Sanctuary for Families. So our human trafficking intervention courts basically have cases where men, women, and children are charged with prostitution, but we recognize them as trafficked victims, and we provide them with support and services, and oftentimes a non-criminal resolution of their case. That's not to say that there shouldn't be prosecutions against people who engage in trafficking, but that's law enforcement, local prosecutors, and obviously federal prosecutors, but I'm talking from the New York State perspective. And those cases are tough to make. They involve a lot of resources. More and more resources are being devoted to them. But we recognize that we were able to do something for the victims, even though they came into our courts as defendants. So we have laws now in New York that allow judges to vacate convictions of prostitution against that have been where women and men come in and say, you know, I've decided to leave the life of prostitution. Here I'm making a motion to have my old cases vacated, because that allows them to go about leading law-abiding lives, hopefully get jobs, and not be stigmatized by that conviction. So what we've done is now in 11 places in New York State, we have human trafficking intervention courts. We have judges trained. We partner with support services like Sanctuary for Families to assist the victims. And we are addressing trafficking from that perspective. These courts basically handle 90% of the cases where women and men and children are accused of prostitution. The other point I want to make in New York State, and I did it in my role as a sanctuary as well as a judge, there needs to be a focus on demand. That's been raised by a couple of people thus far, because it is demand that fuels the industry. And many of you may have heard about a lot of the publicity surrounding the Super Bowl, which was held in New Jersey. And we are involved in an anti-trafficking coalition, and we did a tremendous amount of public service announcements. We partnered with an advertising agency to get the word out there that it is a crime to buy sex in New York State and in New Jersey, and there are punishments. However, the punishments are fairly light, and the enforcement is very sporadic. So if I could send you away with one message, is that go back, talk about demand, because if there are changes in the laws regarding demand and there are enforcement, it will drive the industry down. And Judge Lamb talked about slavery. We have a program now we call the New Abolitionists Program through Sanctuary for Families. And we have identified first 50 and now another 50 leaders in the state and in the country who are leading the fight against this slavery. We're calling them the New Abolitionists. So I encourage all of you to become one of those new abolitionists, because times will change and attitudes will change, but it requires a movement. And I think everyone here is a part of that, and I encourage all of you to become a part of that as well.
Thank you so much. You know, talking about punishing or trying to stop the demand, I would like to mention a country that has been very successful in this, and that's Sweden. Sweden has a very good law that also punishes the Johns, so-called Johns.
And does not criminalize the actual person who is engaged in prostitution. It is really they call it the Nordic model. It's something to look at and emulate, and they have seen a dramatic decrease in prostitution and trafficking as a result of this new model.
Yeah, and this has been going on for a few years. Even the ads on TV or even the streets, how they display merchandise, that is also done very tactfully from what I see, because we also have an office in Sweden. And I was like, I said, if I'm going to ever move somewhere, I'm moving there. So they really have good. I would like now to open it for questions and answers, please. If you can speak from here.
Oh, sure. I'll just make my way down there.
Sally, should we get online, or what would you like us to do?
If you can speak loud enough or with the mic.
Here we go.
Would be much better. And please state your name and do not make a long statement, just a question, please. Thank you.
Well, my name is John Gerke. I'm with the University of St. Thomas Law School here. And I also want to talk about the question of demand, because most perpetrators have my chromosomes. So, to state my question, I used to be addicted to pornography, and I stopped when I read a report by philosophers, lawyers, and psychologists about a 2-week conference held at Princeton. The papers were published by the Witherspoon Institute under the social costs of pornography. And the case they make is that it is undeniable that the culture of pornography is the fertilizer feeding this disgusting sex trade we've heard so much about today. And I have not the words to praise the work that you all have been doing at the legal end to curb this trade and help these victims. My question is, looking forward, acknowledging the ambassador's demand to look at the demand, and as was reiterated by Her Honor, at CSW 59, can we take a serious look at these cultural values of sex that we greatly enjoy, but also acknowledge that perhaps we have to reconsider them and choose between them and the girl in the dark, lying and crying, hoping she's not about to be raped again? That is my question about how we're going to go about this in the future. Thank you so much.
Well, if you could just frame it, reframe your question a little bit.
Are you, at CSW 59, can we have a series, oh, is it
15.
Right, yes. Can we have a serious discussion about the causes and the cause of the attitudes of the men going towards this, and specifically target the industry of pornography as being a cause of the demand that causes the men to seek out this sex trade? That's what I'm asking.
Well, yeah, I don't create the agenda for next year, but I think it does make sense to address some of that. And, we had a program at Sanctuary called Bystanders No More, and it was getting men involved in the fight against gender violence. And part of what came out was the internet pornography that fuels so much of the violence and the sex trade. So I would suggest that that's something that is certainly worth exploring next year.
I don't know if this exactly addresses what you asked, but at the training that I'd spoken about at the high school, the whole issue of pornography, sex in a lot of the music, what it meant, and actually the words themselves were discussed with the kids. And when they really looked at the wording, and they really were talking about what domestic slavery was, it really brought it to light. And one of the things that we did is that on the board we put down pimp, prostitute, and John, and then we said, give us all the adjectives that these ideas bring up in your head, because pimp has become a good word, right? Pimp my car, pimp my whatever, it's become an acceptable word. And then we ended up putting down for prostitute, we put down slave. For John, we put down slave holder, slave buyer, and then for the pimp, slave seller. And then we asked folks what they thought now, so that this whole issue of the buy, the demand, really needs to be thought of in a way that really publicly is acknowledged and not glorified.
You know, a couple of years ago, there was the song that won the Oscar, the Academy Award for Best Song was "Life's Hard, Life Out There is Hard for a Pimp." And that was, and the band went up, and somebody made the point, at that point, Martin Scorsese hadn't won an Oscar yet, but this song won an Oscar. So it's glorifying a life that somehow should never be glorified.
And also the movie, you know, the movie with, what is it? The movie that she's a, what is
Pretty
it?
Woman.
Pretty Woman, yeah. That's, you know, everybody wanted to be a prostitute because they wanted to find Richard Gere.
Thank you, Sally and Ralph, both, of course. Thank you, Your Honors. Richard Jordan from the Royal Academy of Science International Trust, and Ambassador, thank you also for continued leadership in so many different areas in the UN. Just let me say one thing for people to consider. Joining your local community council at your precinct. It is extremely important because I can tell you one citizens organization has helped to break up prostitution rings twice in the city. How the president of the organization sat in a local McDonald's from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. every morning, got the license plate numbers of the cars, recorded the movement of the cars. You don't deal with these people. They are nasty people who drive the cars. They can be women also. They have guns. These are not nice people. And you give the information to your local police, and they are the ones who can then get these people off the streets. And it's not the prostitutes, it's the higher-ups. You want to break those people up, and you want to also get the car dealerships of the cars. If they're stupid enough to leave the names of the dealers on, the dealers ought to be told also. Get these people off the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm Fanta from the Gambia. I'm Director of Social Services, and I've worked in the area of trafficking for the past 10 years. But what we've realized that in sub-Saharan Africa, pimps and traffickers are now moving to that end because laws are limited, and laws that have already been established also or enacted are not being monitored. And there are a lot of porous borders within countries. You would notice the United States Trafficking Persons Report has indicated most of the West African countries, especially the Gambia where I come from, into Tier 2 of not prosecuting. But it's difficult to prosecute where borders are porous, where traffickers can come in within an hour and get out of that particular country. So that brings us into the issue of partnership and mentoring of courts, because most of our courts and judges and magistrates are not often with issues of trafficking and would only sentence those who are into prostitution. So it's really difficult for West Africa, and I feel partnership is key in this area, that we will need support and mentoring to enable the legal practitioners to understand the dynamics in trafficking, and also to understand that victims are not perpetrators and are not to be judged by their actions. Thank you.
Just very quickly, indeed, the problem is so complex that we have to do it and attack from just practically all levels. From what Richard said about the council, the minute level, we have to do it. That's a micro. On a macro level, it's too difficult because, member states coming out with resolutions here and there on an agreed conclusion. Ultimately, it's the states that will implement that will have to come out with legislations that would guide the country, the judges that will implement this. But there is also a very important dimension that must be realized, and this is more of the advocacy of a few negotiators, so to speak. Because through the few years, the focus, I adverted to that very quickly, and I thought it would have been picked up. When you talk about the 3 Ps coming from Palermo, there is really one P which is very important, that is partnership, because it's all of us. And the case in point really is that we have to extend real help, because there are those which are in such a difficult situation that more than words and more than, shall we say, the laws of other countries that can help solve certain problems, but in the sitos of certain areas, we still need the resources. That's why I even reverted to the Global Trust Fund against trafficking, and it's sad to say it's only 16 countries who have contributed to this fund, and only 12 organizations. I am proud of my government that how little it is. We contributed 10,000 to this, but there got to be a global effort, because this is a problem for all. It's not just here in America. It's not just in Sub-Saharan Africa. It's not just in Asia. It's an abomination to us all that in this day and age, it has gathered a new, shall we say, phase of slavery that must be stopped. And I go back to my whole theory that it's all linked from this specific topic or issue of human trafficking to the dignity, of course, of a woman and child, and then to gender equality, and on to the twin, which is either development, total development, or global peace and security. But I would say that please work through number of organizations, civil societies. I have been briefing several societies because, and then work with your government. It's a long way, but we just have to go and continue pushing on. Thank you.
It is so accurate what the ambassador said, because I've sat in many sessions, including trafficking and so on, and I saw how embarrassing it is to several countries. Nobody gives money, and it boils down, they need the resources. And a few years ago, I had invited Interpol here. And their biggest problem also, they have a very small office, and they have to take care of all over the world the problem of trafficking, and they have no money, not enough employees. So they were all complaining of the same thing. Nobody gives money. So this is basically, one of the major problems is that they need resources. But as everybody on this panel said, that everybody could help. Everyone here could help and do their bit share. One more question, please.
She has the microphone.
Oh, you do?
Yes, thank you. Hi, my name is Faye Paris. I'm here with my 2 colleagues representing the Women's Bar Association for the state of New York, and I just want to thank the panel, first of all, say hi to Judge Lamb. I have a quick question along the same lines. We've heard of the Global Compact. I want to know how vocal are corporations in addressing or adopting strategies to combat human trafficking, both with respect to manufacturing and making of products, but then as well to address the issues that come to bear with respect to demand, et cetera, and what we're addressing today. Do you know of any such collaborations or any initiatives to donate money to the fund?
Is that to me?
Anyone.
If it's me, that's not my ballywick, so to speak, so I don't know anything about the corporations or anything about the money, so I can't help you there. Maybe one of my colleagues.
Is anyone aware of that?
So when I talked about the California law, that was the point of that. The ABA has, the business section, has adopted the UN standards in a protocol that they've adopted. How widely it will be accepted is unclear, but they really are taking on the issue because the previous president prioritized human trafficking as her main issue, and they tasked each of the various committees to really take it on. And at the training that Sally had talked about on Saturday, the head of the business section talked about the work they were doing, and it was very impressive. Now, how much it translates to actual action, remains to be seen. President Obama did sign an executive order encouraging corporations to do, to be more transparent and to make sure that there's no trafficking in their line. But it's worth checking, particularly given that you're with the bar.
Thank you very, very much.
By the way,
Yes.
yes, a friend of ours brought some Filipino fingers. When you leave, please try to test it. It's outside. We didn't do it before. But we have it when you are leaving. Try to test it and dip it, and we'll finish it. Thank you.
You, Professor.
Madam Chairman, I'm interested in the call for funding in light of the federal district court's opinion here in Maryland that excluded the Catholic Church from providing services to human trafficking victims. And I find it ironic that we have a call for My name is Teresa Collette, and I'm a professor of law, and I've required all of my students to attend because I think this is one of the greatest crimes against humanity in our century. And I want to invigorate my students and empower them to join you in this fight. But I am deeply troubled when we have also a campaign against religious communities in supporting this, such as the federal district court's opinion in this country that excluded the Catholic Church from serving through a federal grant for human trafficking victims. And I'd be very interested in the ambassador's position on including religious communities who have long served victims of numerous crimes, and particularly crimes of this character.
Yes. Well, I have to dig more about the legislation that was referred to. But I can venture and say a few things on the basis of what you have said, because offhand it does not stand to reason why the Catholic Church is being excluded. And you had already the track record of doing the best you can, as you have said. And in this house, we have been always working for full respect of all types of religion. The Philippines have been working with so many civil societies and religious faith groups working on the interfaith dialogue, interfaith cooperation. How many bloods have been spilled because of religion? And it's time that, and if you have to take a cue perhaps from the Philippines, I think tomorrow, next week, we'll be signing the comprehensive peace agreement in Mindanao. And the role of religion was very dynamic, the interfaith there. Of course, the role of women, by the way, in that negotiation, the Philippine panel was headed by a woman, assisted by a woman, and the opposite side, Bangsamoro, was also 2 or 3 women negotiators. Not just the Muslim, but also the other, because it means all cultural minorities. It's interesting to study that very carefully. And they were part, by the way, 2 from Bangsamoro are part of the Philippine delegation that attended the CSW 58. But not getting out of the topic of the point that you're saying, I am really saddened that that is happening in, I'm sorry, a country like this that profess, and even you pull up a coin in your pocket, and it's supposed to be a non-sectarian everything, but there is a faith on something, and this is something happening. I do not know. But I want to go back to what I started earlier, that I have to ask my technical expert to study and review very carefully what you have said. But often I can provide what I have provided to you. Thank you.
So I don't know if I have no idea what the case is, and if you give me the site, I'd be happy to read it. But I could guess what the issues are, because I'm certain the Catholic Church was never precluded from doing work on domestic slavery. In fact, the case that I talked about that I was involved in, we were working very closely with the Catholic Church, and that was really the lead in that case. My guess is that there's probably some First Amendment issues that we're talking about, and about the issue of government not promoting any church. Is a federal funding church issue? So that's right. I don't know what the issue is, so I'd have to read the case, but I just think that it's probably a funding issue and a federal funding issue, as opposed to a preclusion on participation in any way, because I think that there's a lot of interfaith initiatives by both the state and the federal government in terms of social service issues.
I'd be happy to provide the citation as well as the Court of Appeals.
I was pulling up Westlaw even as we spoke.
Right. No, I'll be happy to provide it.
Well, thank you all. Just, okay, one last one.
Hi, my name is Mrs. Kelly. I'm from Ivory Coast, peace fighter, for women and kids, like the trafficking for the kid. Like I'm fighting against all those stuff. Okay, I met a lady from my home last week, who she has 2 kids here, and she victim of the domestic violence, and then they took with her 2 kids. She was working very well, good job, but because of the immigration statute, and then I think she stopped the job, and then she was under I think they call that Section 8 to help her with the rent and stuff like with the kids. But now this week she has an appointment, like in the letter say that master hearing in May, and they want to stop her right now, the benefit, everything. But in this kind of case, if you have the kids, you can be stopped from the benefit by the federal law.
Well, you have an immigration question and you have a non-immigration question.
Yeah.
And if she has a master calendar hearing, she should have, if she could possibly have, an immigration lawyer. There's one sitting next to you. And, there are also pro bono, not to take away from you, Mr. Brown, lawyers. But I don't know why she stopped from working, but if you have an application pending with the immigration court, if she has applied for relief, then you can apply for a work permit. This Section 8 is city, the other benefits are city. So I don't know why they were stopped, but if she comes into master calendar, which is where about as many people in this room come in, and she would have to plead, they will take pleadings, and they will ask, like, is this true, is this true, is this true, and what relief do you seek? If there's a relief that she has, political asylum, cancellation of removal, adjustment of status, when she files that, she will get work permit. But not knowing the specifics of the case, I would advise her to consult a lawyer.
I told you would be very popular. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All the judges, thank you, ambassadors, thank you. Thank you all for coming. I will see you soon again.